Hello, and this is SCW Training Video 8, the basics of foundation walls. This video will act as a fundamental guide and intro to the process. Step 1. Unloading the forms. Normally, the forms on racks will be in the excavation hole when you get to the job site. These forms or panels for your work site will normally be unloaded from a truck or from a crane. Set up the outside forms, leaning them against the excavation bank. Since wall forms are much larger than footing forms, you will exercise much more caution when moving them. For example, wind can topple wall forms, so tie them down on the rack and/or lean them against the bank. Step 2. Placing rebar. When you place rebar, remember the following simple rules. Follow the rebar sheet at all times. This document is your guide. Certain areas will require different sizes and spacing for the rebar placement. You will set up vertical rebar first, then tie horizontal rebar. When placing and tying horizontal rebar, ensure that it does not interfere with any form ties you will place later on. Verify where the form ties will be placed so that you can avoid this problem. Double rebar is required at all wall steps, footing steps, bulkheads, and around windows and blockouts. Double rebar means you will place rebar spaced 3 inches apart. Step 3. Setting forms. The forms or panels should be oiled before setting in place. This is done with a pump-up sprayer. Do not put oil on the rebar. Pins and wedges connect forms side by side. Each panel has holes ready for pins to be inserted. The wedge fixes the pin in place and binds the two panels together. You may need to use a hammer to get the wedge in. Wall ties are placed in between the inside and outside forms to connect them together at the proper distance. They help to hold the forms against the pressure of the concrete as you. Step 4. Preparing for concrete. 2 people should check pins. Be sure to check the pins on the outside angles or corner. Make sure all the forms are securely fastened together. Be sure to pick up any oil cans, ties, forms, and tools before you begin to pour. Place wood bulkheads using the strap plan for each location. Screws are used to fasten bulkheads to aluminum forms. Either use a self-tapping screw or pre-drill a 1/8 inch hole and use a regular screw. Set grade using a rotating laser. In most cases, grade will be on top of forms. Raise from the bottom until level grade is reached. Then place a wedge between the form and the footing so it will remain in place. Then straighten the wall forms. Pull a string from corner to corner and shift the top of the forms into place, securing them with 2x4s. Step 5. Pouring the concrete. The concrete will be prepared and ready to flow out through the pump hose. One worker will hold the pump hose into the wall forms and guide concrete as it fills the forms up. When pouring concrete, it is best to let it pour on top of other concrete and flow down. Never let concrete fall directly on ties or rebar. This will cause rocks to separate from the concrete mix. Let the concrete hit off of the form or directly onto concrete that is already poured. 2 additional workers will follow behind with the stinger. This tool is used to consolidate the concrete and removes pockets of air in order to keep the wall solid. The stinger is placed in the concrete at a rate of 1 foot per second and is removed at the same rate. Another worker will follow behind the stinger with a shovel to level the concrete. As you did before pouring, after pouring, you need to pull a string from corner to corner and once again, secure the forms with 2x4s. Lastly, a worker will follow with a long derby to evenly flatten and smooth out the concrete. Use either a float or a derby. This process is called floating. Step 6. Post-pour work. Straps and bolts are used to connect foundation to the wood framing. When placing bolts and straps, it is important to wiggle them in order to get the concrete around them smooth. The exact location of straps and bolts vary from job to job, but the info will be found on the strap plan. Walk through the worksite to pick up any remaining tools or trash. Step 7. Stripping foundation forms. Once the concrete has had a chance to set, you will be ready to remove the foundation forms. Remove the pins and wedges, And once this is done, the forms can be removed. Work together. Load the forms onto each rack and firmly tighten the straps that hold the forms onto the rack. The crane operator can then load the racks onto the crane truck. Alright, that's quite a bit, so let's review. We now know the basics of building walls at SCW. Remember, there are 7 steps to building walls. First, you and your team will unload the forms and set them approximately where they'll be going. Second, place rebar, beginning with the vertical columns. Then, starting in the corners, tie the horizontal rows. Third, set the forms. Use pins and wedges to connect panels side by side, and place wall ties to connect the forms. Fourth, prepare to pour concrete. Double check all the details now, before you pour, because it is much easier to prevent mistakes than to fix them afterwards. Then straighten the wall forms. Fifth, pour the concrete. One person will manage the pump hose. A second will use the stinger to consolidate the concrete, then re-straighten the wall forms. And behind them, another will work to level out and float the concrete. Sixth, embed bolts and straps in the still wet concrete. Be sure to leave the surface of the concrete even and smooth. Seventh, after the concrete has set, remove and load up the forms. Be sure to gather all your tools and always leave the worksite clean. Remember, if you are ever unsure how to complete your tasks or have questions on specifics, ask your crew leader. Thank you for watching.